Okay.
Okay, so Madame Delia, can you hear me please? Mr. Fernando, can you hear me?
هل تسمعونني جميعا؟
Okay.
نبدأ.
So please, I'm going to deactivate all your microphones and
الآن سأبطل جميع الميكروفونات وسنعطي الكلمة للسيدة المدير العامة لإطلاق أشغال هذا المؤتمر.
What a pleasure for the
أنا مسرور أيما سرور باسم الإيسيسكو أن يكون معنا كل هؤلاء الضيوف على رأسهم الرئيس السابق وأيضا شخصيات أخرى من مجال التربية والتعليم. يسرني ويسعدني أن أرحب بكم جميعا إلى هذا المؤتمر الافتراضي حول التربية والتعليم في إطار المجتمعات التي نريد. يسرني أن أعطي الكلمة الآن لرئيس السابق للبرازيل. تفضل السيد الرئيس.
Primeiramente, agradecer o convite para participar deste encontro e saudar os participantes desta mesa de diálogo. Quero cumprimentar a doutora Alissa Albright, da Parceria Global pela Educação. Quero cumprimentar o Prêmio Nobel Kailash Satyarthi, promotor da Marcha Global contra o Trabalho Infantil. Quero cumprimentar o doutor Salim Ailid, diretor-geral da Organização do Mundo Islâmico para Educação, Ciência e Cultura, e quero cumprimentar a doutora Kumbu Boliberri, relator especial da ONU para o Direito da Educação. Saúdo as organizações que dirigem e que promovem este encontro, do qual o nosso Instituto Lula tem o privilégio de participar. Quero iniciar expressando o sentimento de solidariedade à dor das famílias das vítimas da pandemia pela qual o nosso mundo está passando. Quero falar sobre esses tempos terríveis, depois de tratar do nosso tema central, que é a educação e seu papel na construção de uma nova sociedade melhor e muito mais justa do que esta em que vivemos. Neste mês de setembro, iniciamos as
the full, and we invested in transportation, because in a country that many regions, it's very distant, the school from home, which they would have to use buses, bicycles, and small boats to get to school. We invested in building libraries, computers for the schools and tablets to the students. And about my brother Fernando Haddad, who was our education minister in the great part of our period, he will speak in another day in this seminar. Unfortunately, Brazil today has not had an education minister that it will be able to participate in such a discussion as the one today, because this government today credits itself the enemy of culture and education itself. I also have to mention about landmark left. The first was the opening 430 vocational training schools that we country. This is more than everything that's ever done in the 100 years of the Republic in Brazil. These new vocational training will give we enhance the number of enrollment in public federal universities and private universities too. We went from 4 million to 8 million students. We built 19 new universities, and the state government started to fund educational credit for the students, and we passed a bill of affirmative action to assure a quota system of students coming from public schools. Black and indigenous people could join the university, the federal university. I am proud to say today that the sons and daughters of the working class people, the young Black people, are the majority of our university students today in Brazil, in the federal universities. My dear friends, any discussion about the future of humanity, about the society that we want to build, has to take in account the impacts of the epidemics that we face today that has come to aggravate the extreme social and economic inequality in the world. Very recently, I was invited by the Buenos Aires University to talk about the world after the pandemics. I must admit that I don't know what will happen. I still don't know what will happen, what will come of our lives. I believe no one knows, but I want to bring here some reflections. The statistics show that the majority of the victims, the pandemic victims in Brazil, are Black people, working class people, of slums and favelas, as we call it, and live in the periphery of the big cities. It's not different from the rest of the world. These are people that live in precarious homes, so we call it, and live in the big cities. It's not different from the rest of the world. These are people that live in precarious homes, that they need to get their support and work every day. They have to use public transportation, and they're much more vulnerable people because they already did not have access to sustainable food and basic health care. So the first conclusion that we can reach is that this pandemic is not democratic, because society that we live in is not democratic, at least not for the majority. Everybody is subject to be contaminated by the virus, but it's amongst the poorest that it produces devastation, a deadly devastation. This humanity emergency is not for the majority. Everybody is subject to be contaminated by the virus, but it's amongst the poorest that it produces a devastation, a deadly devastation. This humanity emergency has led the most responsible governments to adopt measures in the sense to keep the economy and people alive during the crisis, with special credit lines, income transfer programs, and even paying wages to keep the jobs. Even those rulers and the so-called experts that till yesterday defended a very rigid fiscal austerity programs, they understood that now is the moment for government spending, because life is priceless and the economy should exist due to the and not only due to the figure. And it is the state, the government, ultimately, that could moment for government spending, because life is priceless and the economy should exist due to the people and not only due to the figures. And it is the state, the government, ultimately, that could provide the resources and organize society to manage to go through this very difficult moment that we're experiencing. I believe that this is the great lesson that this pandemic is teaching us. The dogma of the minimum state, the minimum government, is only that, a dogma that you cannot find any explanation and not could be justified in the real life. The myth, the market gods, a myth, because it views the lack of ability to give answers to the problems of the world we live in. I have the privilege to talk with Pope Francis, that is dedicating to study this to his soul. We dedicating to study this to his soul. We know that this is not a task only for the economists and for people of goodwill. We have to involve the academia, the intellectuals, the artists, the political parties, the trade unions, social movements, grassroots movements, churches. Everybody has to be included. Otherwise, we will not reach anywhere if the governments of the world, the ones that have state power, do not engage themselves in a very objective way in a deep change. We will not reach if the governments of the world, the ones that have state power, do not engage themselves in a very objective way in a deep change in the relationship between the people and money. For many centuries, they said to us that hunger and the extreme poverty was as natural as rain and as the sunrise. During centuries, they told us that the poor, the majority are Black, and the sons and daughters of the working class were condemned to repeat the sad story of their parents, grandparents, grandparents, and great-great-fathers. But at Brazil, during one decade, Brazil, we managed to prove that a country could be for all, and with special focus in the majority. In Brazil, we managed to prove that a country could be ruled for all, and with special focus in the majority that is excluded. The tremendous inequality between human beings is unbearable, but as it lasts, we will still always have the dream to change that moves us towards the future. This is, from my viewpoint, another lesson that we can learn from the pandemics. Even though the crisis could be deep, even though darkness could come, it relies on us to share pandemics. Even though the crisis could be very deep, even though darkness could come, it relies on us to shed light to the darkness. And I believe that it was never so necessary to dream and to continue to struggle, to fight, to build a better world than the one that we live in. My dear friends, before I end my speech, I would like to say some few words here. We managed to prove since 2000 and 2016 that yes, it is possible to build another world. We managed to prove since 2003 and 2016 that yes, it is possible to build another world, because we did do that in Brazil. We proved that the poor is not part of the problem, it's part of the solution. We also proved that the poor could go to school, could attend schools. We proved that a housemaid or the son of a housemaid of a brick worker, layer worker, could become an ambassador, could become a professor, could become a diplomat. Prove that yes, it's possible. Guarantee 3 meals per day. That a housemaid or the son of a housemaid of a brick worker, layer worker, could become an ambassador, could become a professor, could become a diplomat. We proved that yes, it's possible to guarantee 3 meals per day for each human being in Brazil. And we also managed to prove that we can raise the wages does not mean to increase inflation. We proved all that. We proved that we can increase the domestic market and also increase our exports. The only thing that we needed to do is to do the obvious, is to put on the people, include the people in the budget, in the national budget, to bring the people in that will be not a secondary player to become the core player of to become for each and for each state. And to bring the people in that will be not a secondary player to become the core actor player of history to become for each country and for each state. And so thank you very much for this invitation. Have a very good meeting, and God help us to find a solution for the pandemics and also a solution after the pandemics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. Speech should be
صفوف التعليم بسبب هذه الأزمات. واليوم بناء على الدراسات التي تم القيام بها حوالي 80 مليون طفل لن يعود إلى صفوف الدراسة. هناك كثير من التعهدات تقدمت بها مؤسسات عالمية وحكومات، ولكن لم يتم الوفاء بهذه الالتزامات، وهذا لا يمكن أن نقبله كواقع. لا يمكن أن نحرم أي طفل من حقه في التعليم، وخاصة التعليم الأساسي، وبالتالي خاصة أننا في عام 2020. تابعت الوثيقة الإطارية التي ستناقش في داكار في الاجتماع الأممي القادم، وعلينا بالفعل أن نعود إلى جادة الصواب ونركز على الأمور الأساسية خاصة التعليم. أصدقائي الأعزاء، كلنا مطالبون بأن نشتغل يدا في يد وأن نضع أجندة حقيقية لحماية الأطفال المهمشين وضمان حقهم في التعليم. بداية الشهر القادم سننظم قمة للدفاع عن حقوق الأطفال المهمشين، وهناك إعلان سيختتم هذه الفعالية والتزامات. نطلب على الأقل 20% من اعتمادات صندوق مواجهة كوفيد-19 يجب تخصيصها لدعم الأطفال الفقراء وأسرهم عبر العالم، وهذا مبرر ويمكن تمويل هذه النقابية في البرازيل، في أمريكا اللاتينية، في أقاليم أخرى، لأنه لا يمكن بالفعل أن نتخلف عن مد يد المساعدة لهذه الفئات الواسعة من المهمشين. أصدقائي الأعزاء، نطلب أيضا أن كل الدعم الذي توفره الحكومات للمؤسسات الاقتصادية والمالية وغيره يجب أن يركز على البرامج الاجتماعية التي تنقذ فئات كبيرة من براثن الفقر والبطالة، وأن تستفيد الفئات الميسورة من هذا الدعم. إذن هذا أو حان الوقت كي نطلب تسريع البرامج الدعم الاجتماعي وتمويل بالتالي التعليم لفائدة الأطفال بالأساس. أنا كنت أحد مؤسسي مبادرة الشراكة العالمية للتعليم، وكنا نناضل لتعبئة الموارد، وحان الوقت بالنسبة للحكومات والشركات الاقتصادية أن تدعم هذه البرامج الاجتماعية لمد يد المساعدة لهذه البرامج التي نقوم بها. كما قال الرئيس لولا، نحن بحاجة إلى ريادة سياسية، وبالفعل ريادة فخامة الرئيس لولا في البرازيل ساعدت في إنجاح العديد من البرامج الاجتماعية وتعزيز برامج التعليم لفائدة الأطفال. ثالثا، نود أيضا وأتمنى وأطلب أن المؤسسات الصناعية والتجارية عليها أن تلعب دورا رياديا، والحكومات عليها أيضا أن تضع تشريعات تضمن بالتالي وتكافح عمالة الأطفال، لأن هناك مئات من ملايين الأطفال يشتغلون بدل أن يذهبوا إلى المدارس، وهذا يزيد الطين بلة. وبالتالي هؤلاء الأطفال حينما بالتالي نمنعهم من العمل سيذهبون إلى المدارس. يجب أن يكون هناك إذن تشريعات صارمة تكافح عمالة الأطفال. رابعا، نطلب أيضا إقامة شراكة للحماية الاجتماعية عبر العالم. رأينا كثير من أقاليم العالم ليس فقط في البرازيل كيف أن نظم الرعاية الاجتماعية ساعدت في استمرار الأطفال في دراستهم وأنقذتهم من براثن الجهل والفقر، وساعدت في بناء القدرات.
not be any other binding factor than the compassion for children to make this world a sustainable and peaceful place. I call upon you to march from exploitation and injustices to shared prosperity. I call upon you, my dear friends, to walk from ignorance and illiteracy to education. I call upon you to walk from wrongs and injustices to the world of justice. I call upon you to walk and march from exploitation to education, from violence to peace. Let us march from darkness to light. Let us march, my dear friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Again, speech that is a music to our ears, delivered by Mr. Kilash, Nobel Prize winner. You mentioned that education is an equalizer, is a gateway to justice, is a prerequisite to the society that we want. You also focused that this pandemic is not just only a health or economic problem. It is a crisis for morality and justice. You called for education and the freedom of millions, those who are in danger. You mentioned that 8 trillion were allocated to fight against this COVID-19 and only 0.3% were allocated to marginalized and poor people. This need to be revisited and need to be brought up everywhere in every conference, in every international conference. You mentioned that we made the promises and the promises has been made to our children, and yet many times promises were not kept. I thank those 88 Nobel laureates who joined together to protect those marginalized children and came up with an announcement or a declaration. You also mentioned that 20% of COVID-19 should be reached, or those 88 Nobel laureates mentioned that 20% of the budget or the financial resources that were allocated should be reached to those marginalized children. And I think this is justice. You also called that debt should be canceled. And definitely, I think this is very important, where poor countries will focus on education and helping their children. You stated that this is the time for government to support international organizations who really sort of reach those marginalized and poor children. You made some hopes and demands. Companies should take the leadership, not government, and no child labor or no children should be involved in the labor supply chain, and that to establish a global social protection, which is very important, and that once COVID-19 vaccine is discovered or is being approved, it becomes a public good and given to the poorest people. And that those young children should take the leadership and that no child should be left behind or left out. I like your words that you ended, that we should walk away from ignorance to education, walk away from injustice to justice, from violence to peace, from darkness to light. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate these words. And I'm sure that everyone is going to be listening and hope that they will take actions, whether from ministers, governments, or those who make the decision in education in our societies. We move to a dear friend, our next speaker, Ms. Alice Albright, the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Partnership for Education. Global Partnership for Education has done quite a lot of work towards shifting and mobilizing resources to the poor and poorest countries. And I hope that Ms. Alice would give us some and shed some light of what they have done. So welcome, and the floor is yours, Ms. Alice.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malik. First, let me check that everybody can hear me. Okay. I'm gonna assume that's a yes. Anyway,
Yes.
Your Excellency President Lula da Silva, Mr. Satyarthi, Dr. Al Malik, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a true honor to speak with you today in such esteemed company, including the Ministers of Education from Pakistan, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Tunisia. I'd also like to extend warm greetings to our dear friend, Dr. Boli Berry, for all of her also outstanding work in education. Dr. Al Malik, I'm so grateful to you as Director General for hosting this important event. Dr. Malik and I first had the opportunity to meet in his home country of Saudi Arabia in 2018, when I addressed a gathering of the region's brilliant education educators. And since then, we've seen a series of inspirational and creative engagements across the Arab region. The Global Partnership for Education works to mobilize new partnerships and investments, including with Arab and Muslim country partners. In 2018, the UAE became the first Arab donor country to join GPE, providing us generous financial support and critical strategic and technical input. In 2019, we consolidated our relationship with the Islamic Development Bank with a signature framework of cooperation on innovative financing for education, unlocking the GPE multiplier in joint member countries. And my colleagues are working with our very dear friends at Dubai Cares, a leading global philanthropy, to ensure a successful Rewired Summit 2021 at the upcoming Dubai Expo. And I know that many of us are looking forward to that moment as hopefully an opportunity to be together in person once again. Today, I'm going to make 4 points. First, the societies we want cannot be built without guaranteeing a quality education for every child. If anybody harbored any doubts about the importance of education, the COVID-19 pandemic erased it. Education is not only fundamental to a child's future, it is also essential for her parents to be able to go to work to support their families. It is vital to the prosperity of nations and to a peaceful world. GPE's vision is of a world where every child has access to an education system that is equitable, inclusive, and resilient, and where a high-quality education is not limited by one's economic status, gender, disability, or place in society. But that vision, and this is my second point, is far from being a reality. Children, families, communities, and countries suffer the repercussions of denying the right to a quality education. The COVID-19 pandemic took some 1.6 billion children out of school, putting everyone at risk of falling behind, but especially students living in poverty, girls, refugees, and migrants. Some of these will sadly never return. Early marriage, teen pregnancy, child labor, and poverty will be on the rise. But even before the pandemic, more than 250 million children did not attend school, and many who did were not learning enough. Girls especially are left behind. They are 1.5 times more likely than boys to be excluded from a primary education. We ignore girls' education at our own peril. An educated girl is more likely to lift her own family out of poverty. She is more likely to immunize her children and send them to school. The economic costs of not educating girls are colossal, leading to between $15 and $30 trillion in lost lifetime productivity and earnings. This is why GPE puts equality at the heart of everything that we do. Third, turning education around for our children will require sustained investments and innovation. This has been at the heart of GPE's approach for nearly 2 decades. We are the only partnership and fund dedicated exclusively to improving education in lower income countries. Since our founding, we have invested $7 billion to help transform education systems. Our innovative approach has helped partner countries enroll 160 million more children into school, and more than half of these are girls, and save $6 billion through more efficient education spending. With regard to COVID, so far we've provided more than $439 million to 55 countries to support their COVID-19 responses. And all of this has occurred over the last few weeks during the height of the pandemic. Governments are using these funds to launch innovative distance education programs to support teachers and equip schools to reopen safely when that's possible. In places as diverse as Pakistan and Rwanda, governments are investing to make education systems more resilient now and for the future. But this emergency funding is just a drop in an ocean of need. Without urgent action, the economic impacts of COVID-19 could roll back decades of progress on education, and we simply can't afford to lose this ground. We must safeguard education spending and make it a core part of our COVID-19 response and recovery plans, including, as many others have said, relieving, postponing, and restructuring debt. We must mobilize international finance, deploying these resources to countries most in need and where children are most at risk. Fourth, and this is my final point, it will take all of us working together to get the job done. Business as usual will not get us anywhere near our vision of a universal quality education. We have to both protect budgets, scale up financing, and innovation. This fall, GPE will launch our fourth replenishment campaign to ensure that we have the resources to continue this vital work. I invite all of you to become part of our campaign because education is the most important investment a country can make in its future. Excellencies, strengthening education systems transforms lives. I am impressed at how forward-looking the Middle East is when it comes to education. One of the next frontiers is to bridge the digital divide because remote learning in various ways and solutions associated with it will be part of our future. I urge every one of us to become a change maker. This is how we will reimagine and transform education systems to help create the societies that we want. Dr. Al-Malik, I thank you so much, Your Excellency, for inviting me to join this wonderful event. I wish everybody best health and warm wishes and look forward to a moment when we can all gather again in person. Thank you again so much and best wishes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alice. Again, GD has always in the front line in fighting not just only crisis, but fighting poverties and making sure that, as you clearly stated, quality of education is in the heart of GBE. You clearly stated that society cannot be built without education, and it's vital for prosperity, and I definitely agree. Funding of more than 400 million in the last few weeks to support marginalized and poor countries. I think this is a kind of an international organization that really makes a difference, which is quite important during such a crisis. We must work together, absolutely, and I think that you hit really the center of everything, that not just only international organization, not only government and companies. I think everyone, we all should work together to make our world looks better. Once again, thank you very much, Alice, as usual. Thank you. Now I move with my speech, if you allow me. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, former President of Brazil. Mr. Kailash Satyarthi, Nobel Prize winner, Ms. Alice Albright, Chief Executive Officer of GBE, Excellency the Ministers, dear guests. I am very pleased to welcome you all today to this crucial meeting on education and ISISCO social mission, the society we want, to discuss what I truly believe must be a priority for everything we build together, education. On April 2020, during the tough situation of international lockdown due to this unprecedented COVID-19 crisis, ISISCO embarked on deep transformation phase of our societies and has launched the Society We Want initiative. We aim to build healthy, peaceful, prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable societies. As Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. Education is the key for eliminating gender inequality, to reducing poverty, creating a better planet, preventing needless death and illnesses, and to foster peace. Our today gathering is a great opportunity to challenge ourselves about education we need for the present and the future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, education is a concern and in the heart of every national, regional, and international agenda, and in every country's development strategies. However, despite the valuable effort made by countries and by international organizations to enhance access, retention, and performance while promoting gender equality, the learning poverty indicator demonstrates that in low and middle income countries, the percentage of children at the age of 10 who are unable to read or understand has reached 53%. It's unfortunate that girls and women continue to remain underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The internet access and availability remain a critical issue for some countries, particularly in the African continent. And countries need to be supported to build a strong education management information system that will boost their education literacy. The pandemic has taught us that we are not prepared for such a crisis, and we need to step up and make a concerted effort to overcome it. The schools, universities that we know today may no longer exist tomorrow. It is time to revisit and reconsider our education system, to rebuild the education of the future that we need. COVID-19 has revealed the need for innovative education approaches and models, in particular, the use of artificial intelligence in education. The 21st education system, or the 21st century education system, will be completely different. Those who will win this pursuit are the ones that can foresee the future and make them today realities. Ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to reiterate the promise and commitment I made to our member state 16 months ago, to place ISISCO as a beacon of a global outreach within its realms of competence to overcome the challenges and keep pace with regional and international changes, while promoting multilateral cooperation and partnership, decentralizing efforts to further reflect the ground realities on education, science, and culture. Our commitment responds to the aspiration of the Islamic and the world at large for inclusive, sustainable development and a prosperous future through all forms of education for everyone and at all levels. Once again, I express my determination for ISISCO to contribute in achieving the education for all goals, and invite all stakeholders in education to join us in creating a strong and unified education management system as an enabling factors in the achievement of our education goals. Many international organizations like ISISCO share similar and homogeneous aspirations and goals. Instead of competing, we complement the efforts of our counterpart organization and are delighted to work hand in hand to achieve together the advocacy of education for all. And thank you very much. And now we move to our next sessions, and I will ask my dear colleague, Ms. Combo, to take over and moderate the second session. But once again, I really would like to thank His Excellency President, the former President Brazil, Ms. Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, Mr. Kailash Satyarthi, the Nobel Prize winner, and Ms. Alice Albright, the Chief Executive Officer of GBE, for their participation and wonderful speeches at this opening session. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Excellence. Je voudrais vraiment
very much, Excellencies.
vous dire que vous avez fait un
I would
excellent
like to tell you
message à l'endroit à la fois de nos invités, mais à l'endroit du monde entier. Excellence, Monsieur le Directeur Général, avec votre permission, je voudrais très sincèrement remercier Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président Luis Inácio Lula da Silva du Brésil.
I would like to thank the President of Brazil as a special reporter of the United Nations for the right that was in this framework that we invited him. So thank you again, Excellency. Thank you to all the guests. Thanks as well to His Majesty the King, Mohammed VI from Morocco, for this land of peace that allow us to host and organize all our activities in peace. Now I would like to call upon Her Excellency, Mrs. Claudina Ayokol, Minister of Basic and Secondary Education of the Gambia. So Mrs. Ayokol from the Gambia. Excellency Ayokol.
Okay, okay. I think she's not connected. We will give the floor to the Minister of Pakistan, the Honorable Minister Shafkat Mahmood, please. You have the floor, and you're welcome.
The mic, please.
Est-ce que vous pouvez activer votre micro, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le Ministre? C'est en anglais? Okay.
Excellency, could you please turn on your microphone? Thank you.
Yes, yes. Can you hear me now? Yes. Well, Dr. Salim Al-Malik, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, it was indeed a pleasure to hear President Lula and Ms. Alice Albright and my friend Dr. Malik, and their speeches outlined the problems that the world faces in the shape of education. And I'm very grateful to be invited to this August gathering. We've been living through a very difficult time. COVID-19 impacted all countries and it impacted Pakistan also. And during this period, our educational institutions remained closed for 6 months with a great loss to our children, and because of many reasons, but one of them was that not everybody was connected, and the digital divide that some of our worthy speakers had been talking about earlier became far more visible and far more stark during this crisis. So we have been facing many challenges. We already, even before COVID-19, we were facing a challenge of out-of-school children. But during the pandemic, as schools remained closed, many of the institutions, especially low-fee paying private institutions, had difficulty surviving. So our fear is that during this period, our challenge of out-of-school children has increased. We are collecting data, but many of the children, or some of the children who stopped going to school, particularly between the ages of 10 and 15, went into the job market, and in that sense lost their education. So among the many challenges, this was one of the challenges that we now face, but there are other challenges that we have had for some time in our country. And the topic of this particular portion is equitable and inclusive quality of education for all. So one of the things that we inherited was that our education system reflected the social divisions in our society. I think that is probably true of most societies. But one of the extra problems over here for us has been that even the curriculum being taught in different schools, private schools, government schools, religious schools, was so different from each other. So in that sense, the whole idea of inclusive education was definitely not there, and it was not equitable either, because the poorer income students were studying a curriculum which was not preparing them for the challenges that they face in the world. So therefore, one of the first tasks that we have undertaken, and which we are now nearing conclusion, is that we are developing a national curriculum. This might become, this might be routine for many countries which have had a national curriculum for a long time, but we did not have a national curriculum. So we are, as a part of our desire for equitable education, we are trying to level the playing field for all children in the shape of learning outcomes, student learning outcomes that we believe that every student should come up to. And in that sense, the education for all objective, which obviously would take a long time to have equitable education for all, but at least one major attempt has been made to level the playing field for all children in Pakistan. So this has been something that even during the pandemic, a lot of work has been done on this, and our national curriculum would be launched very soon. On out-of-school children, as I said, that we already had a problem of out-of-school children. We probably have one of the highest numbers of out-of-school children in the world. We had 20 million out-of-school children, and my fear is that we may actually add to this number because of COVID. So we have launched multiple programs to reach the out-of-school children. In our social protection plan, in which we give cash transfers to poor families, and during the pandemic, we gave 150 billion rupees in shape of cash transfers, as also a component that if these families send their children to school, they would get an extra stipend. So this program, which is known as Wasila-e-Talim, has been specifically launched to address the problem of out-of-school children, because many of the out-of-school children come from low-income families. Many of those families are receiving assistance in the shape of social protection, and therefore we have launched this program. Also, there is another, we did some research on out-of-school children, and we found that one of the reasons that many children don't go to school is because their parents don't see the value of education. And they don't see the value of education is because they want their children to be in the job market as soon as possible. And therefore, we have started to introduce something which is very often happening in other countries, especially in Europe, but we have started to add skills training as a part of our curriculum for graduation for high school, so that those children who go beyond the age of 10 can get some skills. So therefore, their parents can see the value of having skills education, and which leads to better prospect in the job market. So similarly, to reach to the girls, we have also launched a number of programs, because social factors particularly were hampering the education of girls, because once they graduated beyond primary, the access to secondary schools was away from home, and the parents did not want to send their girls children far away from home. And so technology is opening up many doors, and technology is really helping us to reach out to people who do not have access to secondary schools or high school. So I think we are seeing technology as a huge boost to many of our efforts to reach children who are not going to school. And we are now going to use tablets to not only teacher train, not only reach out to informal schools, but we'll also reach out to women and girls, and technology is going to be a big help. Incidentally, in the question of technology, as soon as we closed the schools, we immediately launched a teleschool, which was watched by 7 to 8 million children every day. So that was quite helpful. So there is so much to say, but technology is the way forward, and we are looking at educational technology, development of new content, reaching out to children who are difficult to reach. And in this, I must say that Global Partnership for Education has been very helpful. And Ms. Albright, who was here, they have helped Pakistan in emergency assistance for COVID, reopening schools for COVID. And we are definitely has helped us a lot in opening schools and making other arrangements to reach out to children who are not in school. So just to sum up, we are looking at a variety of initiatives which would be helping us to ensure that every child is somehow reached out to. We follow the policy of no child left behind, and inshallah, by the grace of Allah, we will try and expand our programs, and over a period of time, we hope to reduce drastically the number of children who are out of school. There are many other initiatives, but I think my time is running out. I want to thank Dr. Salim Al-Malik. Ever since he has arrived at ISESCO, it has become, and it is becoming, a very vibrant education, and I congratulate him. A vibrant organization in every field, actually, not just in education, and I congratulate him for that. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Excellency, for your speech and wonderful messages, and also your experience in your country. Talking about inclusive education, this is really a fundamental issue if you want to build the society we want. And also you are talking about equitable education for all children, and you are in the process of making some reform in your country, and you are a leadership in this way. It's really a wonderful moment to congratulate you for this great strategies and orientations. You are talking about poor families and how to take some actions who are really specific actions to be sure that poor families are able to make the effectiveness of the right to education of their children. And the out of school children also, you are making some research to be sure that you have the best information to take the best decision and to work on this area. The role of technology is really also a huge area, and your country is working on, and you have also the support of GPA. And I think hand to hand, I'm sure we will make a better work. Thank you, Excellency, for your contribution and your comment, and you are really, really welcome. Thank you again. The next speaker will be the Minister of Brazil, Mr. Fernando, please. If he's here, Haddad.
I'm here.
Yes. Please. You have
I
the
will
floor.
I will speak in Portuguese, so I'm waiting
Yes.
for a translation. Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you. Muito prazer em estar.
It's a great pleasure to be here today. And I will compliment a speech made by our President Lula that governed Brazil for 80 years. He was in office for 8 years, and he actually put education in Brazil in amongst his top priorities. I had the opportunity to work with President Lula during 7 years of his 8 years in office as Minister of Education. And so I'm a live witness of how much he cared for education and the revolution that he did in Brazil in the light of the past century. I'm sorry, and I was also like to refer to my colleagues, ministers of education of their respective countries that also bring a great contribution with such an important theme in the post-pandemic situation, which would be the case of education that would affect the lives of hundreds of millions of children around the world. I would like to share the Brazilian experience and the principles of the educational reform in Brazil, because I believe that some of these principles could follow by the period post-pandemics. We had 3 basic principles that guided our educational program during the 13 years that we ruled Brazil. The first and most important one was to value the teacher, valuing the teacher's work in Brazil. And for that, President Lula passed a constitutional amendment foreseeing for all Brazil, we're talking about more than 200 million inhabitants in Brazil, a minimum wage, a floor, is specific for the teachers, a separate minimum wage for the teachers. That is to say, Brazil has a minimum wage for any worker in the country, but it has in its constitution a minimum wage foreseen for one just professional category, which is the teachers, Brazilian teachers. And this floor, this initial wage for beginning a teacher's career drew the attention of the Brazilian youth for something of which they were far away from for a long time, where the profession as a teacher was being devaluated, historically speaking. And so we put that as our core focus in the community, but especially we had the target of the youth so that they could serve their country as teachers. And this minimum wage, specific minimum wage for the teachers, transformed the reality of many young people, especially those that live in the poorest regions of the country, where this salary would has an appeal, is attractive in the interior of Brazil, a much higher appeal than it would have in the big cities. The second aspect, important aspect, was the funding aspect for education. For the very first time in the Brazilian history, the funding of education, of the Brazilian education as a share of our GDP, the gross domestic product, was fixed above the average of the OECD countries, which something that never had happened before during the 20th century. That is to say, for the very first time in the history of Brazil, where public funding, public investment as a share of the GDP overcomes the average of the richest countries in the world that are OECD members. This made it possible to more than double investment per student on elementary school or basic education. And the third point, the third topic, very important, we started to assess every 2 years all the public schools in Brazil, without any exception. We started to publicize the results per school so that the families, the households could appropriate themselves of this information about their local school. And we fixed goals, targets, that each school would have to reach a certain goal, those learning goals in the basic disciplines of domain of the language and of mathematics. And this made that all the teaching system would mobilize itself in favor of a high quality education. We know that education is not restricted to the domain of languages, of mathematics, and the native language of the country. We know it's not limited to that only, but we also understand that without the control of the native language and mathematics, it's very difficult to guarantee full citizenry. That is to say, the follow-up of the literacy and the learning of math of each Brazilian child. Now it became part of the routine of the follow-up by the families and by the governments, local, state, and federal level. So the change of management of education went through these three issues. First, the evaluation of the teacher. Second, permanent assessment. And then third, state or government funding so that the transformation could happen. But there's a fourth element of this process that I would like to add. And it is not a usual recommendation, especially from the international bodies. And I like to draw your attention for this fourth element, this fourth thought. We did not establish a focus policy for education. We did not establish the burden of those that would receive the additional effort that the government would be undertaking. We adopt as a goal that the investment would be done since basic education, elementary, till graduate studies. And so going through the university studies, professional, vocational training studies, elementary school, reaching, and even education of people, disabled people. That is to say, we decided to bet that each one of the Brazilians would have the right to take one step forward, that they would have the right to have a promotion regardless of their educational situation, especially looking towards the education of the working class people and the poorest people. That is to say, if a poor kid arrived to the university, he felt that right he won the right to go to a graduate studies. If a poor kid, they had daycare, now he would have the right for elementary school. If a disabled child is not enrolled in a school, yes, now it would have the right to receive the necessary support so that its attendance would be guaranteed in school, and that it would have an adequate professional to give support to its intellectual development process for this disabled child. That is to say, we decided that the educational issue would not be an issue on the supply side, but it would be on the demand side. Any Brazilian that would be demanding to the Brazilian state or government to promote their own education would have this right assured by the Brazilian Constitution. And I would like that this fourth element that was key to convey to the country the message that no one would stay behind. It doesn't matter the color of the skin, the gender, the social class, their abilities. That is to say, people would progress as much their ambition and their vocation would allow them to progress, or as much their desire to improve themselves vis-a-vis education. This is the message, and this is a crucial message for a country that is poor and still in development. Otherwise, it's still developing country. Otherwise, you would convey a message that the child, that its dream, that the dream of the child is not guaranteed because the country, in a certain way, is submitted to its role in the international hierarchy. And this is a path that we did not want to follow, that there's no child that would have a predetermined destiny, that her future would be a construction that depended on he or her, because the government would give support, whatever may be its ambition, its vocation, its desire. This government would support. And from the response from international bodies, like international bodies, is to condemn a country and condemn the youth of a country, of that country, for the international division of labor that is pre-established. And to change this so pre-established international division of labor, we need to educate with ambition to transform, with the ambition to emancipate the people. And so that's why you cannot deny to anyone to reach the highest levels of education, which means the formation of citizens that are capable to make criticism in a world that is under constant transformation. That's why I close my comments saying that it's not because the country is poor or is still a developing country that this country should surrender, should inhibit itself of its ambition for human development. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Excellency. It's really a pleasure to listen to your wonderful message and your sharing. This is really a great experience from Brazil, focused on three pillars. One is how to motivate teachers, and it's a key for the quality of education. We are sure for that. The second message, and it is really also how we can fund education, because it is in the history of the country, how you decided to make a great budget, but to institutionalize this budget in the law. And this is really very, very, very important to share with the other countries of the world. The third thing is also the quality of education, but the public quality and inclusive education, taking care of everybody. That means people who are poor, people also, you take care of gender perspective, social care, and this is really, I think, how also to build a good policy with the decentralization of resources, but also for human resources. And I think this is really how to build the better future for the education, and to have an education who is really with ambition for the country, with ambition for the citizen, to emancipate, but also to transform the society. We are really learning very well from you. And thank you again for this wonderful sharing with us. The next speaker will be my colleague of the Honorable Minister of Tunisia. Please, Hatem, you have the floor, and really you're welcome to share with us your knowledge. And it's really 3 decades of experience, and we are really happy to have you with us. Thank you for coming and joining to us.
Thank you, dear sister. Thank you for inviting me. And let me first start by thanking ISESCO and its very dynamic Director General, my brother, Dr. Salim Al-Malik, for launching this very, I should say, courageous initiative. Societies we want. At this very critical moment in humankind history. Dear friends, we all are aware of the very deep changes the world is living today, and also the very deep disarray of nations facing so harsh challenges without any vision and any mean. And because I believe in international solidarity, I appeal today to all world leaders to support this initiative, especially that its main goal is to promote education and put it at the heart of each national and international project for sustainable development. The main and the most important question is, what do we need to make it a successful and an action-oriented initiative? I must respond first that we need a strong commitment of international community. This commitment should be around an international plan of action for education based on a very concrete roadmap and especially based on 3 issues. The first one is vision. We are now living in a world where globalization is going at a very fast track. The only issue which is still fragmented and divided is education. I don't say that we do not need national educational system, but I say that time is right today for having an international platform of knowledge that could be shared by each and everyone wherever they are on this earth. Vision is very important because we need to put all our efforts together. We need, for the next at least 20 years, we need to put in common all our efforts for education. And I should even say we must internationalize the issue of education. This could not be possible, as I said, without a strong commitment of international community. And as I said it in the International Conference of UNESCO last year, we have to put in mind that most of our countries will not reach the goals of SDGs. It's for us something undoubtable. And that's why we have today to put those international efforts and means together with a vision, but we need also new learning approaches. The world is changing, everyone is saying this, and we have to stop making diagnoses and mourning on the very bad situation of our national educational systems. We need to act now. How? By having in mind that this world, which is changing, needs new learning approaches. We have today, and our brother, the Director General of ISESCO, Dr. El Malik, said it, we know now that, for example, artificial intelligence, ITCs, are now making so rapid and so fast progresses. We need to get into this trend, and we need to be aware that in the future, international artificial intelligence and ITCs will be at the heart of every project of reforming education, nationally and internationally. Most of the jobs of today, more than 60% of them, will disappear in the next 20 years. We have to take this into account and change our programs, change our methods, change our pedagogies, and give our professors and our masters the time and the skills to be able to at least adapt themselves to do those very profound new changes. The third and last thing, which is for me very important and have to be part of this roadmap of this international plan of action, is find innovative ways of financing education. Personally, I'm against canceling debt. I'm for the recycling of debt into educational projects. We need money. We need innovative ways of financing education. And I call up today to all bankers of the world and tell them that's the best investment they can do today and for the next at least 2 or 3 decades is an investment in education. States, our states are not anymore capable to face the huge challenges of financing education. I can give one example. In the budget I used to have the most important budget of the state of Tunisia in education, more than 7 billion Tunisian dinars. 95% of this budget goes to salaries and wages. We need to really invest in education, in innovation in education. And this is the key of all the future reform. So what kind of societies we want? It's a society where education is at the heart of every project of sustainable development. We could not leave things going as they are today. We have to take our responsibilities and we have to be able to face the new challenges together. This is my message, and I'm sure that many of you are hearing it very strongly. Thank you for listening, and all the best for everybody.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Excellency. It's a pleasure, my brother, to meet you again and to listen your vision, who is really a wonderful one. The society we want must be a society who has education in his heart. And many components of this society, we must have education in the heart of this society. And you are calling also for the international solidarity to have a strong commitment. And I'm sure if we have this kind of commitment, we are sure we are able to achieve the SDG goals. And you call also for how to democratize the platforms and also how to innovate. You are talking about the artificial intelligence. And I think it's really one key way, and ISESCO is really working on that. And His Excellency is really one of the key person who today are really pushing how to use this kind of tool to move also for better education for our world. You share with us also how to do that, to be sure that we will have innovative pedagogy. We'll have also good content, that means curricula, but we have also to give capacities to teachers, and we will have also the new ways and innovative ways to finance the education. For example, recycling debts. And I am sure many civil society are really organized and they are fighting also on this area. And I'm sure in a few terms we will really see some achievement. Thank you again, my brother, for sharing your knowledge and also your strong vision with us. It's a pleasure. The next speaker will be our great sister, Mrs. Aishaba Diallo. Please, you have the floor, and it's a pleasure to see you and to meet you and to listen to you. Madame Aishaba, est-ce que vous avez allumé votre micro?
Your mic, Mrs. Your Excellency, your mic.
Excellent Mr. President Lula, Excellent Mr. Director General of ISESCO, dear colleagues ministers, dear Kalash, dear allies, distinguished guests. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you today to share a few thoughts on this theme that is so important to ISESCO. Indeed, you must recognize the transformational nature of education and the importance of ensuring quality education in order to achieve other sustainable development goals, including poverty reduction, improved public health, greater economic growth, environmental protection, safer and more peaceful, stable communities. Education cuts across all SDGs. It is the backbone of sustainable development. More importantly, it is a powerful tool to help low-income countries boost their economies and get out of poverty. Yet, 258 million children and youth, including 130 million girls, were out of school. And over 60% of the 173 million adults illiterate were women and girls. This is so unfortunate. As education gives women resilience, promotes health for themselves and all members of the family. Educated women have fewer children that they educate better and keep healthier. Women's education boosts countries' economies, promotes tolerance, sustains social cohesion, brings peace, contributes to protecting an environment, and ensures prosperity as well as democracy. Another area with high investment return is that of youth. And I'll take Africa as an example. The AU summit in Addis Ababa in January 2017 recommended to harness the demographic dividend through investment in youth. You know that the population in Africa is 1.2 billion people, and 60% of them are below 25 years. In 2050, this number is going to be 2.2 billion. And in 2100, the number will increase to 3.7 billion. It is a continent which has high potential. Each young woman and man has a potential and should have dignity, self-esteem, should have a dream and a hope. All they need is to be equipped with the right knowledge and skills, including technical and vocational, STEM, and digital, that will allow them to remain relevant on the global scale in and beyond. It is only through education and provision of quality manpower that real economic growth and development could take place and drive change in anywhere, especially in Africa. To achieve this and move the education sector forward, it is critical to invest in 5 major areas. First, upgrading the teaching profession. Second, promoting knowledge transfer. Third, reviewing the curriculum to cater for both present and future manpower. As in 10 years' time, even less, 40% of today's jobs will disappear. 90% of future jobs would require ICT skills, and 2 million new jobs will be created in the computer, mathematical, architecture, engineering fields. Fourth, upgrading school infrastructure. 5, striving for the underprivileged, the poor, the left out. As the latter is concerned, the COVID-19 outbreak has provoked a health crisis, a social economic crisis, including education, and a food crisis, which we are living now. It has shown us that the poor students were not equipped with the appropriate technologies and did not have access to internet in order to have access to platforms put in place to ensure distant learning. In Africa, for instance, many of them will drop out, in particular women and girls. In some countries in Africa, for poor children, the combination of radio, TV, and basic mobile phones did allow a rapid and easy way to reaching the majority of children who do not have access to internet. With a significant investment in education, countries would effectively participate in the digital economy. For this to happen, governments and corporations should join hands to act together to provide access to internet and electricity at affordable price. This will bridge the gap between those who have access to internet and those who have not. To keep it short, in order to embark on a deep transformational process of our societies, education has a key role to play as it is a foundation for human fulfillment, economic growth, decent work, gender equality, sustainable development, protection of the environment. It contributes to understanding all human rights, to reducing of inequalities, eradicating poverty, promoting health, boosting the economy, and generating the opportunities for just, inclusive, and sustainable societies. All this will contribute to promoting global citizenship, peace, social cohesion, and democracy. As said Kofi Annan, education help, helps bring about tolerance, intercultural dialogue, and respect for diversity, as these are more essential than ever in a world where peoples are becoming more and more closely interconnected. I will switch into French. Les sociétés que nous voulons doivent donc avoir pour fondation.
The societies that we want should have freedom, justice, and social equity, and should be based on good governance and a policy of transparency and equality of chances, a system of values that honor democracy. To raise the challenge, we need to focus on education. Education is key.
We share a common destiny. We can master it only if we face it together. And today, ISESCO is giving us this opportunity. Je remercie donc le directeur général de m'avoir donné cette
Like to thank Mr. Director General for having given me this opportunity. Thank you to your staff for the excellent work. And my last word, my colleagues at the Ministry of Education, may God encourage you because your work is the hardest and the most difficult. So you need an adequate budget in order to ensure access to education. And the words of Mr. Director General need should be heard, and I am confident that we uh, all will join this mission of His Excellency. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, Mrs. Aisha Badialo, for this message. Excellent, as usual, inspiring. You have inspired all participants and our guests, and you focused on three main issues. Education means values. Societies we want need to be based on values such as social cohesion, peace, democracy, political ethics, and governance. And you have also given the conditions, prerequisite for education to be a right, an effective right for the population as a whole. And you focused also on inclusive education to ensure that poor families, and particularly girls and women, have access. You also underlined the population dimension. Population in Africa is a potential, high potential for Africa. You have also underlined the training of teachers and on the use of new technologies as a very important potential and high potential in order to ensure the success of the system of education. Insisted also on the best way to construct, build up is to finish curricula and make sure that these curricula are open. And you also mentioned and underlined the informal sector, which is a major sector for development in Africa. And you had finished by giving us, all of us, advice and words of wisdom. Um, for us, you are a leader, you're an African leader for whom we have respect because you have always been a model for all African women. And you have given us a very practical piece of advice to the Minister of Education and to all of us to work hand in hand and to make sure that education is a right and a right that gathers all other rights. And this is the society we desire and what we want. Thank you once again, Your Excellency Aisha Aba Diallo. You were excellent as usual. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Excellency, the Minister of Gambia, are you here? Mrs. Claude?
I am ready. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm here.
Welcome, my dear.
Sorry to be joining you late. I had another meeting at the National Assembly of the Gambia.
Oh, I understand. You're welcome. Thank you for
very busy, extremely busy today.
network. Yes, my dear. You are welcome. You can you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you see me? Am I being seen? Yes. Can you see my screen?
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be joining this meeting. I was looking forward to joining, but the only reason that I'm coming in late is that I've been very, very busy since morning. And I was at the National Assembly to address some issues. Nonetheless, I'm very happy to be joining you now. And I'm going to be taking you through the policies and mechanisms for ensuring equitable, inclusive, quality education for all. Your Excellencies, all other protocols observed, I will now take you through my presentation on this very important topic for this very important meeting on the societies that we want to see. 258 million children and adolescents youth are presently out of school, and this is according to the UNESCO 2019 report. 1 out of every 6 to 17 years old are excluded from school and will be excluded from school in 2020. And 40% of children worldwide will fail to complete secondary education. And even those who are now enrolled will not acquire basic education. Relevance of quality, inclusive education for all. Education, as we know, is a panacea for sustainable development, and it's one of the most important tools to change one's life. And good quality education changes the lives of individuals and provides stability in life. It also helps one to develop knowledge, skills, personality, mental, and moral and physical abilities. It increases the capacity of individuals to produce, grow, and innovate, as well as guarantees full enjoyment of human rights as fundamental to achieving sustainable goals. Education for all will ensure that children have access to basic education of good quality by creating the right environment in schools and in basic education programs in which children are both able and enabled to learn. You may note, ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, that Article 29 on the aims of education advocates for education to allow children reach their fullest potentials in terms of cognitive, emotional, and creative capacities. UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education of 1960. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination of Women, the CEDAW of 1979, and other key international human rights and treaties also emphasize the prohibition of the active elimination of discrimination. Still on relevance of quality education, schools offer structured and routine peer group contact, friendship, support, and safety, as well as provide feeding programs in many places, which are sometimes the only source of nutritious meal that these children will receive. And we are told right now that 234 million children are not benefiting from school meals around the world. When students feel connected to their schools as a caring and community, they are less likely to engage in risky behaviors such as smoking, drinking, drug use, and early sexual initiation, and they even perform better in schools academically. Inclusive education also helps to accommodate all children, regardless of their physical, intellectual, social, emotional, linguistic, or other conditions. It also creates an opportunity for children with diverse abilities and from diverse backgrounds to have interest or to have their needs met by creating child-centered pedagogy capable of successfully educating all children. Challenges and barriers to attaining inclusive quality education. In the Gambia, the main barriers to participation and retention in education are a mix of family and school-based factors encompassing issues of affordability, accessibility, and family and cultural circumstances. Food security can also be a barrier. Poverty has adverse and social economic circumstances. Vulnerability, and this is about children who are affected by war, armed conflicts, terrorism, and displacement, most likely not to attend school. Disability, girls with disabilities may face additional challenges as families may task them with additional household chores that will prevent them from learning or returning to school. And during this time of pandemic, this is one of our greatest fears for girls' education. Access, lack of access to education can have significant consequences on children's physical and mental well-being. Gender, girls are more likely to be excluded from education as they may be exposed to early marriage or sexual harassment. All these are woes of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are very much concerned that it will affect many children around the world. Who are the ones being the children who are at risk of being excluded from education? Abused children, children who are abused, refugees or displaced children, as you can see, ethnic minorities, poverty-stricken children, children in conflict zones, children with disabilities, nomadic children, HIV/AIDS orphans, language minorities, and children in conflict zones, and who are usually taken captive as child soldiers. And here is a picture of a disabled boy. And as you can see, inclusive quality education is a foundation for dynamic and economic societies. And so children like this boy in this picture are not supposed to be left out of education. They have a right to education and they must be included. What are the policies? Policies have been put in place to address the numerous and various challenges to education. Goal 4 of the SDG creates an opportunity to ensure that opportunities are provided for all to attain accessible, quality, inclusive education. National documents in the Gambia, such as the Children's Act, first of all, the Constitution of the Gambia talks about compulsory education. And the Children's Act, Article 28, the Draft Disability Bill, the Education Policy of 2016-2030, all these are Gambian documents that acknowledge that education for all is a human right. And all of them have been pronounced, all of them have the pronouncement of such. What mechanisms are there for ensuring inclusive quality education? The national legal provisions are necessary to promote the education agenda. The adoption of a strong legal environment underpinning national policies and strategies would make a significant contribution towards achieving the right to an equitable and inclusive quality education for all. Harnessing inclusive education as a concept underpinned with the core principles of non-discrimination and equal opportunities for all, irrespective of their disabilities, their conditions, or their social backgrounds. Social protection mechanisms for all children must also be put in place to ensure their right to education. Special emphasis should be placed on states' legal obligations to guarantee government accountability and transparency, and to ensure that normative frameworks translate into concrete actions and effectively supports efforts towards attaining the SDG 4 and its corresponding targets. What is the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education, the Gambia strategy in attaining quality inclusive education? My ministry has put in place strategies to address the following: access, quality education, vocational education, tertiary and higher education, and capacity building as key priorities to attaining an equitable, quality, inclusive education for all. What's our journey so far? Enrollment increase has been registered for all educational levels from 2016 to 2020, with a growth rate of an average growth rate of 7.1%. the GER, the gross enrollment ratio, has also increased between 2016, the commencement of the new education policy, and present, this moment, 2020, and gender parity has been attained from 2017 to 2020. There's been expanded opportunities and access for out-of-school children through support to majlis and out-of-school children in one of the most difficult and remote areas of the country, and this is in Region 5. MOPS's journey towards the attainment of equitable, inclusive, quality education still. We hope to improve the quality of teaching and learning through the curriculum. Enhancing access through expansion of the network of basic education and early childhood development classrooms, and provision of feeding to students, school feeding to students. Creation of a special needs education. We have created a special needs education unit, and this is put in place to make sure that strategies for the inclusion of students with special needs are mainstreamed in our schools. There is tuition-free education in the Gambia, from ECD to the basic education level, right up to the senior secondary level. Majority of teachers have gone through initial teacher training, while many have been trained in special needs education for inclusion. Distance to school has been reduced, and many more communities are now involved in school-related activities. We have reduced distance from school from 3 kilometers to 1.5 to 2, not more than 2 kilometers, for all children to be able to have access to education. The way forward. MAPSI, which is the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education, the Gambia, will strive to consolidate gains made in the achievement of an accessible, equitable, inclusive, quality education by regularly making reviews to take into consideration emerging issues to make the sector more inclusive to attain the sustainable development goals. In conclusion, MAPSI reiterates its firm commitment to the attainment of an equitable, inclusive, quality education for all its students, as enshrined in the 2016-2030 National Education Policy and other legal, international and legal frameworks.
Thank you so much.
I thank you all for your very kind attention, and thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts on the topic of discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Excellency, Madam the Minister of Gambia. It's a wonderful sharing, and we are really happy to listen your challenges, but also how you are moving forward in the education and public, free, and inclusive education in Gambia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I think we have already finished the first session, and we will give the floor to Mrs. Bai for the second session. Please.
Thank you so much, my dear colleague Kumba and the distinguished colleague and panelists. Après avoir écouté les perspectives des
After listening to the different points of view of policy strategies that shared with us some very important information on the role of education in a polyvalent society. Now we'll be given the floor to Professor Daniel Cara. I would like to remind you that this session two perspectives from experts and practitioners. These are experts representing Brazil, South Korea, and Switzerland, who will share with us different components of the role of education in the society we think for. Mr. Daniel Kala, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kindness of the organizers of this event, for inviting the former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, that in the fact worked a lot for the right of education. And I'd like to greet Dr. Salim Al-Malik, Director General of ICER School. And also I would like to greet Dr. Boli Beret, a great person that has advocated for education. And on behalf of Dr. Salim Al-Malik and Dr. Boli Beret, I would like to thank the Islamic world and the African countries of all the contributions that they gave for the building of the nation of Brazil. And we are brothers and sisters. As brothers and sisters, we should work together. This is the spirit of this event, which is fundamental for the international community to discuss the right to education. The idea of this webinar is to discuss education and the societies that we want. And to make this debate more concrete, we need to discuss the relationship between education and economy, and to discuss the relationship between the economy and education. In this moment, we cannot exempt ourselves to discuss education and then economy from the COVID-19 pandemic's perspective that represents the worst crisis that we ever had in our generation in public health. To make an analysis between the relationship between pandemics and its impact on the economy and the education, we have to analyze cases. I can't bring here the Brazilian case, which is quite representative of Brazil. Brazil is the 9th largest economy of the world, and is seen as that's the latest data that we have available in 2018. We are 200 million citizens, men and women, that are Brazilian citizens, and 51 million students of basic education. That is either they're in elementary school or secondary school. These 51 million students in Brazil, they have 4 million professional teachers, which represents that the basic educational system in Brazil reaches 7.5% of the Brazilian population. But it's important to say to all of you that the challenge is even bigger. We have 5 million children and adolescents outside of school. The data is from 2019. This is the latest data available. 11 million youngsters and adults that are illiterate, 30 million Brazilians in a situation of functional illiteracy, which means that 30 million Brazilians are considered literate, but they do not have the capability to read and interpret texts and to make basic operations for mathematics. Considering all these figures, 97 million Brazilians should be in school, which means that 7 million of Brazilians should meet these 97 million students that unfortunately many of them are not still in school, which means that education should cover basic education that we're talking here. I'm only talking about basic, not higher education. That basic education should cover 52% of the Brazilian total population. It's very important to stress, considering all the educational challenges that we have in Brazil, it's very important to stress who's outside of school today in Brazil. Generally speaking, they are children and adolescents that are Afro-Brazilian descent or indigenous people, children and adolescents with disability, citizens, men and women that were always suffered harm due to prejudices. Unfortunately, Brazil is one of the countries that is most unequal in the world, or the highest country in the world in inequality. Although all these challenges that we face, in 2014, thanks to the influence of civil society, and for the national campaign for the right to education that is recognized internationally as the Brazilian campaign for the right to education that we worked with, we managed to approve the National Educational Plan. The National Educational Plan that was passed, Dr. Almadik, just for you to have an idea, sir, it resulted in a demand of a share of 10% of the GDP of Brazil to be invested in public education. It means that 10% of all the Brazilian wealth should be invested in public education. That is to say, the economic priority in Brazil would be the investment in education and educating its people. Although this decision was made, and this is a decision that I believe is a great example for the role. But 2016, 2 years after the National Plan for Education was approved, Brazil faced a coup d'etat, a coup that overthrows President Dilma Rousseff. And as a result of this coup, this parliamentary coup, that we have the enactment of an amendment of the Constitution that was denounced by the international community, and especially by the Rapporteur of Human Rights and Education, by Dr. Boli Beret, because this amendment to the Constitution said that for 20 years there would be a cap to spend or invest in money, public budget in education and healthcare, which really matters to the Brazilian people. That is to say, Brazil established in the words and in the analysis of important figures, even from the IMF, the most insensitive economic policy in the world. In 2016, I had a meeting with Gordon Brown, the former prime ministers at the UN, in a previous discussion to the General Assembly of the United Nations. And the director of the Education Commission of the United Nations considered that that policy, that economic policy, was the one that went most against basic education that he haven't heard before. And concretely speaking, due to this scenario that we are facing under this Amendment 95 to the Constitution that was happened in 2016, we have a total lack of priority to the right to education and healthcare in Brazil. Concretely, when the pandemic arrives in our country, our unified national health system, they were not prepared to confront the situation of the pandemics in such a way that Brazil today is the world leader of death tolls by COVID by 100 to 1,000 inhabitants. There's a huge pressure, unjustifiable, from the economic sectors and from the Bolsonaro government to take the kids back to school, which will put the risk, it will cause a life risk of 55 million Brazilians, kids that would go back to school, and that would be dangerous. Brazil is the synthesis of what the world is facing vis-a-vis the pandemics, education, and economy, basically because the right to education is submitted to the decisions of economic nature, especially those related to the financial markets. Education should not be submitted or submissed to economic issues. If we take here as a reference the teachings from Paulo Freire, the main educator of the 20th century, Florestan Fernandes, our sociologist, the main sociologist of Latin America, Nício Teixeira, the greatest educator in the history of Brazil, together with Paulo Freire and Florestan Fernandes, José Martim, Pedro Varela, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Erasmo, all these educational thinkers, all of them that worked on the pedagogical issue, they would say that education is the appropriation of culture. And what is culture? Culture is everything that men and women developed so that they can live in society: science, sports, culture, arts. These are all values, religion, everything is culture. So the appropriation of culture is one of the human actions that is one of the most important ones that are essentially human. And they could synthesize the concept of education with the idea that education is the sharing of the human legacy. And so in this sense, with the importance of sharing this human legacy, and which makes essentially that people that have access to education, in fact, they could have, they are respected, they are prepared for the exercising their freedom, and exercising their emancipation. It's important that the crisis that came from the pandemic situation of COVID-19, it demonstrated two fundamental aspects to the world. The first one was the importance of the school as an essential space of sociability and a essential space of life achievement. And secondly, the importance of the teachers, although all the adversary situations and difficulties that the teachers face to achieve the right to education, they're doing in Brazil and in the rest of the world, performing miracles to guarantee the learning process of the students. And so in this sense, considering the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemics and the difficulties that we have vis-a-vis education, it's very important to say that we need to invert the rationale, the economic rationale. Today we have an economy that submits people. Today, people are at the service of the economy, and we have to develop a new world where the economy is at the service of the people. And this is the society that we want. And to create a world where the economy is at the service of the people, it is necessary to give the priority essentially in educational investment, science and technology, and innovation. This is the concrete road, the guarantee of the quality of life of the peoples for the emancipation of all the people and for the freedom and for the sovereignty of the countries. And concretely, this is the roadmap and the promising roadmap so that we can establish a world that is based on equality, formal equality amongst people, but also based in a world that is based on social justice. A world, as Paulo Freire used to say, and former President Lula called our attention for that, about this fact where you have the consciousness, Paulo Freire, he reiterated very much this, that the world should have the consciousness that education by itself does not transform society, but without education, society can neither be transformed, they cannot change. And so you have to give priority to education and give priority to education doing what Paulo Freire considered the central element of his life. The role of education is to give hope to people, is to free men and women and all the peoples of the land. And so concretely, the relationship between education and economy is that we need to create an economy that could guarantee the investments, adequate investments in education. The best news that I could bring to all of you is that although all the difficulties, the Brazilian civil society has approved some days ago an amendment to the Constitution until the year 2026, although all the adversities that we face and difficulties that are being posed by a government that does not pay attention to care with education, we managed to establish a constitutional amendment that will distribute more than 30 billion reais to the right on the education of children, adolescents, and the youth of Brazil. That is to say, the work of the Brazilian civil society has brought good aspects, although we have a very dark government in office today. So this is the message that I wanted to convey. The right to education cannot be in the hands of the instability of politicians and government. It has to be a concrete commitment for all the international community as it is determined this important event from ITS school and all the mandate that my sister Bolly Berry has in the defense of education as the rapporteur for the right to education of the United Nations. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here once again to say so, to be attending this event, and this event representing the national campaign in Brazil to the right to education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Cora. Your message is very strong. Education has to be the hope for humanities. Et ces mots nous ramènent à...
Obrigado,
que vous avez...
So this, we have exchange talking about human justice and human legacy, the role of culture, and culture has to play a role in building society. We also remember the experience with a lot of efforts that were done. However, some major steps are still to be done to reach the targeted objectives. Thank you, Professor Kara. Now we'll be listening to Mrs. Delia Mamon. She is in charge of the NGO Grand de Paix who plays a very important role in bringing peace to school and to the education system. Mrs. Delia, the floor is yours.
I'm personally motivated by the topic, the societies we want, and its relevance for education policy. Indeed, the very essence of Graines de Paix is to transform education policies and refocus teaching from basic instruction to student self-realization, i.e. student fulfillment. Why? Because this is the foremost means to bring about an appeased, more appreciable world. I won't say much about the context, which I think you all know, but I would like to say this, that teachers are increasingly ill-adapted to the paradigm shift that is going on right now. Teachers are nevertheless stuck having to do school programs that do not respond to the needs of their students for self-esteem, consideration, healthy growth, belongingness, and a sense of purpose. Nor are teachers trained to manage such emotional needs. This leads them to becoming increasingly frustrated. I'm talking about the teachers, and unwittingly violent on the psychological level by belittling, devaluing, and punishing even young school children. The child's right to education, thereby, becomes meaningless if it leads to contravening the child's right to be protected from all forms of violence, discrimination, and mistreatment. So we must act. What is the end goal of education, of quality education in particular? Most educational decision makers still believe that quality education simply means better teaching. Yet already in the year 2000, UNICEF outlined that quality education is also defined by its outcomes. Outcomes, this is a quotation, outcomes that encompass knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are linked to national goals for education and positive participation in society. But please note, societal goals were not yet mentioned in this paper. However, in 2015, the UN itself put its weight to make quality education the fourth sustainable development. And it's about sustainable development. It redefined the goal of education as to provide the knowledge and skills for developing all the other developmental goals so that education can become genuinely useful. These goals include equality of access and inclusion of diversity, as we have heard is such a big need now in education. In other words, quality education does contribute to building fairer society. But is the definition of quality education adequate? I would like you to think about that, because is it sufficient for bringing about the societies we want? What could be lacking? First and foremost, the mention of student development and fulfillment, and of teacher development and fulfillment. Enabling self-realization through public education is not yet on the SDG map. Yes, benefiting from equal access does contribute somewhat to student development, but it's a narrow perspective of what student development should mean. Are they sufficient to learn dialogue and to learn to dialogue and collaborate, to demonstrate consideration and empathy, to help them prevent and refute violence, to help students solve larger issues and build the societies we want? In addition, the definition of quality education doesn't indicate which competence be developed in teachers and in students. The question is open. Shouldn't quality education be enlarged to include both emotional and thinking competencies? Aren't self-esteem and confidence essential goals, education goals, if students are to engage in sustainable development goals? And how about humaneness, or the human values, attitudes, and behaviors that will empower them to overcome societal violence. SDG 4 does mention peace culture education, but it does it as a mere topic among others, when in fact it is the very means to nurture students in the development of their qualities and competencies, whatever subject is being studied. Furthermore, I don't need to say how much the world is different in 2020 compared to 2015, just 5 years ago. Just to summarize, climate, artificial intelligence, COVID, and most of all, I would like to stress this point, which is also an issue in Brazil, but in every society. There are opinion divides between people that are close to explosive, marked by the inability of diverse views, while the geopolitical divides between the most powerful countries are becoming alarming. Instead of coming closer to the society we want, we are moving away. And so, what do we need to do? What kind of education should we be teaching, transmitting, developing, and nurturing? Let us call this full quality education, an encompassing education designed to help students and teachers develop their full potential and well-being. And so what does this encompassing mean? It means a fully inclusive education where all students are given the encouragement to develop their full potential, whatever their differences or disabilities. It means a nurturing education that strengthens their self-esteem and confidence, which is the basis. You can't study without them. Then comes the type of education. It should be experiential and not rote learning. It should stimulate emotional intelligence and stimulate all their psychosocial competencies. It also should be a questioning education that exercises the thought process. We no longer teach children to think, but children are able to think from the age of 4. Just ask them anything to do, and they will tell you, I feel that is unjust. In other words, they understand justice from the earliest of age. So questioning education is very much part of a good education, of quality education. Next, we need an empowering education that will help them use their creativity for resolving the societal issues we're talking about and for becoming the agents for transformative societal change. That requires empowering children, not letting them sit in a classroom and listen passively. We also need the peace culture education that develops the values and skills for bringing harmony in the classroom, for overcoming harassment between students, for overcoming teacher violence, and for preventing, of course, violence and the beginnings of radicalization from school onwards, for resolving conflicts, for appeasing persons and situations, and for developing cohesiveness and harmony with the goal of building safe and peaceful societies. We have devalued peace culture education, but it's fundamental to the goal of a better society. 4 words can sum up full quality education's objectives. And so these are the words: humaneness, discernment, creative solving, and engagement. These concern as much teachers as students. Students will find fulfillment when teachers treat them with humaneness, not coldness. When teachers are able to discern that something is going wrong for the student, and the same goes for students between themselves. We need to teach students to help each other. What is interesting is that these 4 education objectives are the same for 3 separate end goals. Of course, reaching fulfillment, but also preventing violence, and also to differentiate themselves from AI-powered robots. I'm not finished. How many wonder whether such an education program can be developed and implemented in developing countries? And I have a little quotation for you from a person in Benin who's just been trained by us as a super trainer. And he says, Grain de Paix, an opportunity for Benin and a substantial schooling for me. And since the training for teachers training that I've just gone through, I have learned so much that I'm tempted to say that I knew nothing. I was going to live and die ignorant if I had not had the chance of knowing Graine de Paix. Signed, Mumuni. What is the teacher training reform that is required to produce full quality education is the next question. And I would like to talk about 5 major shifts that are necessary that you've guessed from my presentation. The first one is the focus. We need to shift from we have to shift to matching learning objectives to the end goals, not only of education, but also of society. That means we need to shift from rote learning to dialogue-based learning. And no one is mentioning this yet. And truly, I would like to underline the importance of dialogue-based learning. And that comes to the second shift, which are the learning methods. How do we shift, and do we have the methods to shift from passive education to experiential, participative, and collaborative learning, which are the means to develop dialogue between children in an educational environment? Third shift, major shift, teaching postures, shifting to attentive and focused on each student, as opposed to be concerned with one's own self as a teacher, with one's own discourse. It's no longer the discourse of the teacher that counts. It's the discourse of the children themselves, and the children should encourage this. I would like to talk also about the shift in the style of authority, moving from punitive to encouraging students, and the renewed role and value of the teacher profession to reach the societies we want. Such shifts are already starting to take place. Most importantly, we need tools for training and guiding teachers. This is what Graine de Paix has been providing to several developing countries in addition to Switzerland, and including by video conferencing. So my concluding remarks are the following. We are at a tipping point. Too many youths and adults of all ages, even educated persons in terms of diplomas, are left so unskilled emotionally and thinking-wise, so filled with anger and fear from being overwhelmed by current developments, that they adopt oversimplistic thinking. Leaders and diverse groups of persons alike can become the enemy.
Mrs. Delia, really, thank you so much for your
One more line. I only have one more line. I've reached my end. So I would like to conclude by stating that teaching is one of the most beautiful and rewarding professions of them all, and that full quality education restores the true value of teachers in society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Delia, for your very vibrant and inspiring communication and advocacy. Advocacy is really the word, because you really advocate for peace in education system. And believe me, your approach really resonates with ISESCO new vision. Dr. Salim Ben Mohamed really promote peace as a strategic and wide component in ISESCO vision. La notion de paix est extrêmement importante pour les ESCO, puisque il y a une des valeurs de base de l'islam.
This is very important for ISESCO because peace is one of the basic values of Islam. So ISESCO works a lot on issues of peace, and this is reflected in all our sectors. We have a Center for Peace in Yamoussoukro in Côte d'Ivoire since 2015. We also established a peace division in the sector of human and social sciences. And lately, the general director, Mr. Salim El-Malik, put a Center for Inner Peace Dialogue, and this is great for ISESCO. Thank you. I apologize, I had to interrupt. We have so many things to share, and we have important people who are with us since this morning. So being present among us today shows the importance you're giving to this topic of education and construction of peace. Now I would like to give the floor to Professor Corbiel, the chairman of Educators Without Borders in South Korea.
present, to make your presentation within the time, knowing that we'll have the time to share more.
Please respect your time, and we'll have some more time to share as we're gonna publish a journal regarding this issue. Thank you, and the floor is yours. Your microphone is off.
Please, microphone. Micro, yes, please. Micro. Your micro, please. Open your micro. Micro. Professor, please, we can't hear you. Can you open your micro, please? We have some issue with Professor because of microphone closed. Mais nous donnons quelques petites secondes espérant que le micro sera ouvert. Professor, please, your microphone, please. It's okay. Thank you so much.
So I cannot use my PPT file now. Okay, then I make it very the summary of my presentation. Later, please, I made a 16-page long presentation for this meeting, expecting everybody can have that one, but nobody can have the PPT file. So please distribute it to other people who participate in this meeting, who are interested in my presentation. Okay, for the last 15 years, I work with the Burkina people, mostly a peasant woman, no schooling, cannot read, and only agricultural works thing. We termed the project GAPA. It's a two meaning in English and in Korean. In English, it's Global Alliance for Poverty Alleviation. It's a fight against poverty project. In Korean, GAPA means pay it back. Pay it back means Korea has been beneficiary of foreign aid while you are extremely poor, and now we overcome, and our economy is world-class power, so we can share our experience, knowledge, and fun. That means pay it back to others. It's three components within the project. One is, of course, basic is literacy. It's so powerful. The second one is income generating skill training. And so the one is microcredit. We combine three components, make a holistic approach. It's a non-formal education, but we still apply the whole person education. Three component, whole person approach, make some result, not just the result. I should say it's outstanding result. 3 years to get out of illiterate, and then they sit in the national exam, 80% are passed. And we provide them 30 different types of